It was a forgotten ranch, bought for $1, a place where dreams had clearly come to die. But for the broken man who bought it, it held a secret that would change his life. A giant, black horse, collapsed and waiting at the edge of death. This is their story. Levi Croft was a man running from the ghosts of war. The thunder of cannons still echoed in the quiet moments, and the faces of fallen comrades haunted his dreams. He had returned from the conflict a hero in the newspapers, but a hollow shell in his own soul. He sought not glory or fortune, but a silence so profound it might finally drown out the noise in his head. That was why he had bought the Blackwood Ranch. The deed, secured for $1 felt less like a purchase and more like an act of surrender. It was a place at the edge of nowhere, a place no one else wanted, and for Levi, that was its greatest appeal. As he rode onto the property for the first time, the scale of its decay was staggering. It was the skeleton of a forgotten dream. The main house sagged, its windows like vacant eyes. The fences had collapsed, and the wind moaned through the broken planks of the barns. The place was utterly, completely, and blessedly empty. Or so he thought. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the overgrown grass. A strange, oppressive silence hung over the yard, a quiet that felt heavier than simple solitude. It was the quiet of a place that had witnessed a deep and sudden tragedy. As he walked towards the largest of the dilapidated barns, his eyes were drawn to a shape in the tall, dead grass near the broken fence line. It was a dark mound, unmoving. At first, he thought it was a fallen log or a piece of discarded machinery. He walked closer, a sense of unease prickling his skin. The shape was too large, too organic, and then he saw it. The matted black mane, the elegant curve of a powerful neck, the sheer, impossible scale of it. It was a horse, a giant black stallion, collapsed on the ground, its body a landscape of protruding ribs and wasted muscle. It was so still, so skeletal, that Levi was certain he was looking at a carcass. A final, grim welcome to his new, desolate home. He approached cautiously, his soldier's instincts on high alert. He had seen death countless times, but there was something about this scene that felt different. This was not the simple, natural death of a wild animal. This was a slow, agonizing surrender. He reached the creature and saw that its eyes were open. They were not the vacant eyes of the dead, but were dark, intelligent, and filled with a profound, weary pain. As he stood over it, the great horse's flank rose and fell in a shallow, ragged breath. It was alive, barely. Levi stared down at the magnificent, broken creature, and for the first time in years, the wall of numb indifference he had built around his heart began to crack. He, a man who had come here to be left alone to die in his own way, was now faced with a life that was refusing to do the same. The $1 ranch had come with a secret, a living, breathing, and dying secret, and he had to make a choice. Stage 2. The first act of kindness. A glimmer of life. Levi stood over the fallen giant, the cold wind whipping around him, a silent war raging within his soul. A part of him, the weary soldier who had seen too much death, wanted to walk away. It was not his fight. He had come here for solitude, not for another burden, another life to feel responsible for. A single bullet would be a mercy, a quick end to the animal's obvious suffering. He could then begin the quiet, empty life he had paid $1 for. But another part of him, a part he thought long dead, refused to let him move. He saw the flicker of life in the horse's intelligent eyes, a stubborn spark of defiance that he recognized. It was the same spark that had kept him going through the darkest days of the war. He saw not just a dying animal, but a fellow survivor, a kindred spirit that had been abandoned and left for dead. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that to walk away now would be the final, ultimate betrayal of his own humanity. He could not do it. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his own weariness, he made his choice. His first act was simple: water. The horse was clearly dehydrated, its lips cracked and dry. He went to the old well, the rusty crank groaning in protest as he lowered the bucket. He returned with a pail of cool, clean water and knelt by the horse's head, holding it steady. At first, The great stallion refused, its head too heavy to lift, its eyes filled with a deep, wary mistrust. Levi did not force him. He simply sat there, patiently, holding the bucket. He began to speak, his voice a low, rough murmur, not of commands, but of quiet encouragement. He spoke to the horse as he would to a shell-shocked soldier, telling him it was all right, that the danger was over, that he was safe now. After a long, tense while, the horse, perhaps sensing the sincerity in his voice, made a monumental effort. It slowly, painfully, lifted its head a few inches from the ground and drank long and deep from the offered pail. It was the first victory, a small but profound act of trust. Next came food. The horse was starving, its massive frame a skeleton draped in black hide. The overgrown pasture was full of dead, dry grass, useless for nourishment. Levi spent the rest of the afternoon searching the dilapidated barns, and in a forgotten corner of a hayloft, he found it, a small, precious stash of old, but still edible, oats, likely left behind by the previous owner. He brought a handful to the horse, laying it gently on the ground near its muzzle. The stallion, whom he now silently called Obsidian, for its dark, deep coat, ate the offering with a slow, deliberate hunger. For 3 days, this was their ritual: water, oats, and his quiet, constant presence. He would sit with the horse for hours, speaking of nothing and everything, his voice a steady drone against the lonely wind. He was not just nursing a horse back to health. He was nursing his own wounded soul, the simple act of caring for another living creature, a balm on the scars he could not see. A week passed, then 2. A fragile routine was established in their shared solitude. With daily nourishment and care, a spark of strength returned to Obsidian. One morning, Levi came out to find the great horse not just lying down, but standing on its own 4 feet, shaky and unsteady, but standing nonetheless. It was a monumental achievement, a testament to the animal's incredible will to live. The horse, now able to move, began to follow him around the yard like a giant, silent shadow. They were 2 lonely souls, each bearing the invisible wounds of their past, finding a strange, unspoken comfort in the other's presence. Levi worked on repairing the ranch, mending fences, clearing the yard, and Obsidian was always nearby, a quiet, watchful companion. It was during this time that Levi truly began to talk. He had spent years in silence, the horrors of the war locked away in the deepest recesses of his mind. But now, in the non-judgmental presence of this magnificent creature, the words began to come. He would sit with Obsidian in the evenings, as the sun set over the empty prairie, and he would speak of the war. He spoke of the fear, the loss, the faces of the men he couldn't save. He spoke of the suffocating guilt that had driven him to this desolate place. Obsidian would stand beside him, his massive head lowered, occasionally nudging Levi's shoulder as if in understanding. He was the perfect confidant, a silent keeper of secrets. For the first time since the war, Levi was not alone with his ghosts. He had found a partner in his solitude, a friend who understood his pain without needing a single word. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the simple act of caring for this broken animal began the long, arduous process of healing the broken man. A month passed, and the Blackwood Ranch, once a graveyard of dreams, began to show faint signs of life. Levi, with Obsidian as his constant companion, had cleared the yard, mended the main corral, and even patched the roof of the small cabin he now called home. Obsidian had transformed. The skeletal frame had filled out, his black coat regaining its deep, healthy sheen. He was still a creature of immense size, but the wild, pained look in his eyes had been replaced by a calm, intelligent curiosity. He and Levi were a study in contrast, the broken soldier and the magnificent horse, but they moved with a shared, comfortable rhythm, 2 solitary figures who had found a fragile peace together. Levi had begun to believe he had found what he was looking for, a quiet end to a noisy life, a place where the ghosts of his past could finally rest. He was wrong. The ghosts of the ranch had not yet begun to speak. The visitor arrived on a bright, windswept afternoon. Levi saw the rider from a distance, a lone figure on a fine bay mare, moving with a purpose that made him instantly wary. He had not seen another soul in over a month. As the rider drew closer, he saw it was a woman, young and dressed in practical, durable traveling clothes. She rode directly into the yard and dismounted, her eyes sweeping over the scene with a sharp, assessing gaze. She was not what he expected. There was no fear in her eyes, only a fierce, determined intelligence. This was Abigail Thorne, and she had come looking for answers. Her gaze fell upon Levi, then shifted to the giant black stallion standing calmly beside him, and her composure broke. A sharp, audible gasp escaped her lips, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a sudden, overwhelming wave of hope. Obsidian, it is you. You're alive. The use of the name sent a jolt through Levi. It was the name he had given the horse in the silence of his own mind, a name he had never spoken aloud to anyone. How could she know it? Abigail ignored Levi completely for a moment, her entire being focused on the horse. She approached him slowly, speaking to him in a low, loving voice, recounting shared memories, her words a river of gentle affection. And Obsidian, the horse that had trusted no one but Levi, responded. He lowered his massive head and nudged her outstretched hand, a clear sign of recognition and love. Levi stood, completely bewildered. This woman, this stranger, clearly had a deep, pre-existing bond with his horse. She finally turned to face him, her initial shock replaced by a barrage of urgent questions. Who are you? How did you find him? And where? Where is my father? The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Levi explained how he had bought the abandoned ranch for $1, how he had found Obsidian near death in the yard. As she listened, Abigail's face grew pale. She told him that this ranch had belonged to her father, a man who loved this horse more than anything in the world. He would never, ever have abandoned him. She revealed that her father had been missing for almost 2 months. He had stopped writing to her, and when she had come to investigate, she had found the ranch deserted, its livestock gone, and no sign of her father or his prized stallion, Obsidian. Everyone in the nearby town assumed he had simply packed up and left, a common enough story in the unforgiving territory. But Abigail knew her father. He would not leave without a word. And he would never, ever leave his horse behind to starve. A new, far more sinister mystery now settled over the ranch. The question was no longer just what had happened to the horse, but what had happened to its master. The abandoned ranch was not just a place of quiet decay. It was a crime scene. And Obsidian, the silent survivor, was the only witness. Levi's search for quiet solitude was officially over. He was now at the center of a dangerous mystery, allied with a determined young woman who was not just looking for a lost father, but for justice. Abigail Thorne's arrival shattered the quiet solitude of the Blackwood Ranch, replacing it with a tense, uneasy alliance. Levi, a man who had sought to escape the complications of the world, was now inextricably linked to this determined young woman and the dangerous mystery surrounding her father's disappearance. He was initially wary. Her story of a missing father and a loyal horse could be a trick, a way to lay claim to the land he now legally owned. Abigail, in turn, looked at this quiet, haunted soldier with suspicion. Had he played a part in her father's disappearance? Was his opportune arrival at the abandoned ranch a coincidence, or something more sinister? The only bridge between their mutual mistrust was the giant black horse, Obsidian, who now divided his quiet affection between the two of them, a silent testament to a shared past and a shared present. Over the next few days, as a cold autumn rain trapped them in the small cabin, Abigail told him the full story. Her father, a man named Samuel Thorne, was a former prospector who had struck a small fortune in the gold fields years ago. He had used that money to buy this ranch, a place to live out his days in peace. But rumors, as they often do, had followed him. Rumors that his small fortune was just the tip of the iceberg, and that he had hidden the rest of his gold, a legendary treasure, somewhere on the vast, rugged terrain of the ranch. This was the plot twist, the secret that had poisoned their peaceful life. Her father hadn't been a simple rancher, He had been a man living under a golden shadow, constantly fending off prospectors and thieves who came looking for his hidden treasure. He had always dismissed the rumors as nonsense, but the threat was real and constant. She explained that a month before he disappeared, a new, particularly ruthless group of men, led by a former associate of her father's from the gold fields, had arrived in the area. They were not just asking questions. They were making threats. Her father, in his last letter to her, had sounded worried for the first time in his life. He had mentioned that if anything were to happen to him, the secret to finding what he had hidden was in the heart of his most loyal friend. Levi and Abigail both looked out the window at Obsidian, who was standing stoically in the rain. The horse. The horse was the key. Abigail confessed the final piece of the puzzle. Her father had not sold the ranch. The deed, signed over for $1 to a Levi Croft, a name her father had clearly invented, was a desperate act. He must have known they were coming for him. He had created a fake sale, a legal barrier to prevent the thieves from simply seizing the land after he was gone. He had then released Obsidian, his most loyal friend, hoping the great horse would run free. But the horse had not run. In its profound, unwavering loyalty, it had refused to abandon the ranch, staying behind, waiting for a master who would never return. The truth settled between them, grim and undeniable. Samuel Thorne had been attacked, and somewhere on this vast, wild property, he was either dead or being held captive. The $1 ranch was not a burden. It was a sacred trust. And Obsidian was not just a horse. He was a silent guardian, a living map to a secret that had likely cost a man his life. With the truth revealed, their mistrust evaporated, replaced by a shared, urgent purpose. They were no longer a soldier and a stranger. They were partners. Levi's military skills, long dormant, snapped back into focus. He was a master of tracking, of reading the land, of anticipating an enemy's movements. Abigail, who had grown up on this ranch, possessed an intimate knowledge of its hidden corners, its secret springs, its treacherous paths. They began their search. They combed the property, looking for any sign of a struggle, any clue her father might have left behind. And as they searched, they realized they were not alone. Obsidian, the great black stallion, was not just following them, he was guiding them. The horse, who had previously stayed close to the main yard, now began to lead them further afield. He would walk to the edge of a particular ridge and wait, his intelligent eyes fixed on a distant point. He would stop at the mouth of a long-forgotten canyon, refusing to go further until they had explored it. He was not just wandering. He was communicating, using his deep instinctual connection to the land and to his master's last moments to show them the way. Levi and Abigail learned to trust the horse's wisdom. Their hunt for clues became a strange, three-person expedition, a silent conversation between two determined humans and one incredibly intelligent animal. He led them to a hidden campsite, where they found the remains of a recent fire and the discarded casings of a type of rifle Levi recognized. He led them to a dry creek bed, where Abigail found a small, silver locket, a gift she had given her father years ago. They were on the right path. The horse was leading them towards the truth. And as they worked together, a new bond, one of friendship and a budding, unspoken attraction, began to grow between the soldier who had sought solitude and the woman who had brought a dangerous, but vital, purpose back into his life. Days of relentless searching, guided by Obsidian's strange and unwavering focus, had led them deep into the most remote corner of the ranch, a labyrinth of canyons and mesas known as the Devil's Jaw. The trail of clues was growing warmer. They felt it. They were close to discovering Samuel Thorne's secret and his fate. But they were not the only ones. The thieves, having realized that the ranch was no longer abandoned, had returned. They knew the new owner must be getting close to the truth. Their patient search had now become a desperate race. Levi, with his soldier's instincts, sensed they were being watched. The silence of the canyons felt different. It was the tense, coiled silence of an impending ambush. The attack came at dusk, just as they were making camp in a small, defensible box canyon. 3 riders appeared on the ridge above, their rifles silhouetted against the blood-red sunset. It was the same group of men whose tracks Levi had identified. They did not offer words. They opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. In that instant, the ghost of the war that Levi had tried so desperately to escape roared back to life. His first instinct, honed by years of trauma, was to flee, to find cover, to survive. It was the instinct that had kept him alive, but had also left him hollow and alone. He looked at Abigail, who was pulling her own small pistol from her saddlebag, her face pale but resolute. He looked at Obsidian, who stood his ground, a defiant, protective shield in front of her. And he knew, in that heart-stopping moment, that he could not run anymore. This was his all-in moment, the moment he stopped being the haunted soldier and became the guardian of his new home. The war had followed him here, but this time, he was not fighting for a flag or a forgotten cause. He was fighting for her. He was fighting for the family he was beginning to believe he could have. He shoved Abigail behind a large boulder, ordering her to stay down. He grabbed his own rifle, the familiar weight of cold, grim comfort in his hands. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a soldier again, but a different kind of soldier. He was not fighting to destroy, but to protect. They have the high ground, but we have the terrain. When I draw their fire, you run for the narrow pass to the east. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. That's an order. Go! With a warrior's cry, he burst from cover, firing his rifle not at the men, but at the rocks near their feet, drawing their attention, their bullets, towards himself. He was no longer running from the fight. He was running directly into it, a lone man standing against a tide of violence, buying the woman he was coming to love a precious few seconds to escape. He had finally stopped running from his past and had turned to face it, ready to build a future or die trying. Levi's desperate charge created the opening he needed. As the thieves concentrated their fire on him, Abigail, her heart breaking, did as she was told. She ran for the narrow pass, a sliver of darkness between the towering canyon walls. But she was not alone. The great black stallion, Obsidian, galloped after her, not in a panic but with a clear, intelligent purpose. Levi, using every ounce of his military training, laid down a relentless covering fire. He was a master of tactics, making his single rifle sound like three, forcing the attackers to stay pinned down. But he was outnumbered, and his ammunition was dwindling. Just as the thieves began to regroup for a final, overwhelming assault, he heard it. A loud, piercing whinny, echoing from the pass where Abigail had disappeared. It was Obsidian. It was a signal. Putting his faith in the horse's wisdom, Levi fell back, retreating under fire towards the pass. The thieves, sensing victory, pursued him eagerly. He scrambled through the narrow opening and found himself in a small, hidden box canyon. Abigail was there, her pistol ready. But the canyon seemed to be a dead end. For a terrifying moment, Levi thought the horse had led them into a trap. But Obsidian was standing before a section of the canyon wall that seemed solid, pawing impatiently at the ground. As the first of the thieves appeared at the entrance to the pass, Abigail, her eyes shining with a sudden realization, pointed to a thick, overgrown patch of vines on the wall where the horse stood. It was a door, a hidden entrance to an old, abandoned mine shaft her father had once told her stories about. This was the horse's wisdom. This was the secret it had been trying to lead them to all along. It was the perfect ambush point. They scrambled into the darkness of the mine just as the thieves poured into the canyon. From the cover of the entrance, with superior defensive positions, Levi and Abigail held them off. The thieves, trapped in the narrow canyon with no cover, were completely exposed. After a short, fierce firefight, the battle was over. The surviving men threw down their weapons, defeated by a soldier, a rancher's daughter, and the incredible intelligence of a horse. Inside the mine, by the light of Levi's lantern, they found it, not just a place of refuge, but the final piece of the puzzle. At the back of the first chamber was a small, hidden cavity, and inside was not a treasure of gold, but Samuel Thorne himself, alive. He was weak, injured, but alive, having been left to die by the thieves weeks ago. And beside him was a small, heavy lockbox, the real treasure. A month later, the Blackwood Ranch was a place reborn. The thieves were in the custody of the federal marshals, and Samuel Thorne, now recovering under his daughter's care, was safe. The lockbox contained not gold, but the legal deeds to a silver claim in the nearby mountains, a fortune far greater and more legitimate than any stolen treasure. With the newfound resources, the ranch began to heal. Fences were mended, the barns were repaired, and the house, once a monument to solitude, was filled with the sounds of a family reunited. But the greatest healing was in the heart of Levi Croft. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the now peaceful valley, Levi and Abigail stood by the corral, watching Obsidian. The great black stallion was no longer a gaunt, weary creature, but a magnificent beast in his prime, his coat gleaming, his eyes bright with a calm intelligence. He was no longer a ghost of a forgotten past, but the proud, living symbol of their future. Levi turned to Abigail, the silence between them no longer one of caution, but of a deep, comfortable love. He had come to this ranch seeking an escape from the ghosts of war, a place to be alone. He had found something far better. I paid $1 for this ranch. I thought I was buying a piece of land. I was wrong. What were you buying? I was buying a home, a family, a reason to stop running. I was buying my life back. And as he leaned in to kiss her, he knew it was true. The $1 ranch, once a symbol of his surrender, had become his salvation. He had found his peace, not in the silence of solitude, but in the shared love of a brave woman, the unwavering loyalty of a magnificent horse, and the quiet promise of a new beginning.